I want to introduce our two additional panelists here. We have Karen Howe, who's a journalist and the author of Empire of AI. Some of you maybe picked up a copy of her book at the front. If you haven't read it yet, it is really, really, really great. I highly recommend you take a copy, and both Karen and I will be around to sign books afterwards if you so choose. And then we're so honored to be joined by an absolute legend, Dolores Huerta. This is honestly a highlight for me, so I'm so glad you could be here with us. Dolores is, of course, a legendary labor activist and founder of the United Farm Workers Union, but also just fresh off a stint as a member of OpenAI's nonprofit commission. And so we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about your experience with that. But first, Daniel, just to close the loop on your presentation, I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about the role that metaphor and narrative plays in the conversation around AI. In addition to the polling, of course, you kind of previewed the model and the segments that we looked at, but you've also done extensive research into narrative frames that the various players in the AI space use and how these various segments respond to those or the narrative frames that they use themselves. So can you just say a little bit about what that looks like and how it shapes how we think about AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things I discovered, you mentioned my former life in Australia where I worked in sort of electoral politics and issues-based politics for many, many years. One of the things we sort of discovered that is if you want people to shift their thinking on something that's large, complex, and abstract, so whether it's the economy or climate change or taxation or migration, these things are just so big that it's hard for us to picture what they are and how they might play out in our lives. And so we turn towards metaphor. And now metaphor makes up to 20% of all typical speech, 40% of all political speech. And the metaphors we choose have this sort of, I wanted to say magical, but then I'm betraying my own point, this very effective, this very powerful role in structuring our thinking that a whole bunch of experimental trials have illustrated really set us up to think there are natural actors involved, natural conclusions, natural consequences to a thing. And we see that all throughout conversations about AI. We say it's a black box, it's hallucinating, it's a co-pilot, it's an assistant, it's a teammate. All of these things are metaphoric and suggest a world model that the companies in most of those examples I put forward want us to internalize or believe about how these things work. Catherine, as you mentioned, a big research project I did last year as a much more academic university project was looking at the way that these metaphorically structured narratives emerged in policy advocacy across the EU, the UK, and the US. And we found some interesting trends. The two kind of like headline findings from that are industry are very, very, very disciplined about the narratives that they use. We found that they will overwhelmingly use a race, like a competitive running race metaphoric narrative when talking about where we're going or what this should be, when they're talking about the vision for this technology. They'll use a machine narrative when talking about either legislation or about the tools themselves. And it's a very, very effective tool because it means they can say, we're pursuing a prize, but you never need to really justify why you want to win the trophy. It's just the sake of winning it. It also lets them place a great focus on urgency and suggests we're already in the middle of this race and we've got to pick it up. It also lets them very powerfully turn up at like committee meetings and in complete good faith have a conversation about rules and regulations, but because they've already established this idea of a race as the constraint, the rules and regulations exist to ensure the moral legitimacy of the victor. They're not there to decide whether or not we should be running the race in the first place. They're there to stop people cutting corners or doping or any of that sort of stuff. Lastly, it positions the public as this sort of like passive person who's there to cheer on our champion, who they position themselves as. They're the big, strong person out there representing themselves for our team, and it's our job to be on the same team. Lastly, we saw that advocates on the other side had a much greater tendency to use a war framing. So it seems like a natural and attractive choice. War framing works when you make an appeal to a core principle or value. You're saying fairness or openness or democracy is under threat. We've got to rally around to protect this, whether you're a big business or a small business or community group or whoever. We agree on this, right? Let's come together to protect this. But it all falls apart when if you aren't able to articulate a clear villain that everyone agrees on, and also if you're not able to articulate the clear conditions for success. And so our side just ends up narratively constructing something not dissimilar to the Iraq War. It's like we're not really sure who we're fighting and we're not really sure when we'll have won. And as a result, people kind of get disaffected and lose faith and lose confidence and stop coming with us.
Yeah, so that's helpful. And, I think just to set up the idea about how these frames work in the conversation about AI so that we can be more sort of aware of them when they are being used on us and sort of identify what are the metaphors that are being used and what are they trying to make us think about this tool as they're being used. And Karen, one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is because you employ a metaphor. When you talk about AI, empire of AI is a very clear metaphor about colonialism and domination. And I'm curious, I would love to hear a little bit about what, a description of what that metaphor is and how you see that playing out. But I'm actually more interested in how you came to land on that metaphor. As a fellow author, I know that when you're gathering all of this information, you're trying to synthesize it into what is going to be the narrative arc of this story. The sort of frame kind of falls into place. I'm wondering how that worked for you. And then also really importantly, like once you have that frame in place, what does it unlock about the conversation that didn't exist before?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here, and I'm so excited to get
Karen
to share
flew
a
in
panel
yesterday
with
from Hong
Dolores.
Kong, and she's flying to Edinburgh tomorrow, so we're thrilled to have her on her round.
And I'm coming off the end of a cold, so I apologize if I start having a coughing fit in the middle of this. But so to go to your question on how I first came to the frame of empire, it was actually based on some scholarship that had been happening for years within certain academic communities that were comparing the AI industry to colonialism. And I started reading about this in 2019 and became really fascinated by this idea and the parallels that they were documenting in their research around this frame. And so I started thinking, as a journalist, I want to go out in the world and see whether or not what they've conceived of theoretically might hold up in the real world and see whether or not there are stories that support that kind of idea. And so in 2019, I started a project that ultimately a lot of the reporting fed into my book, but it was a series that I did for MIT Technology Review called AI Colonialism, where I went around the world looking at the way that the AI industry pre-ChatGPT was already impacting some of the most vulnerable communities in the world. So I went to places like South Africa, where I was looking at the way that the facial recognition industry had swarmed into the country while they were being criticized for not being able to identify Black faces, and the impact that that was then having on the South African population, where activists there were describing to me that they felt like there was a recreation of a digital apartheid, where the deployment of these facial recognition tools in their streets all around the city was policing the ability of Black people predominantly to move freely within their environment. And that was, a very clear example of this colonial overhang and the acceleration of these colonial legacies, or re-entrenchment of these colonial legacies through AI. And so when ChatGPT came out, I was thinking a lot about how has that changed? And I really felt like it accelerated a lot of these challenges, because now we're talking not just about the impact that smaller AI tools like facial recognition can have, but we're also talking about a colossal amount of resource consumption being used to build modern day chatbot general purpose AI systems. And so there's a colonial, extractive, exploitative aspect to the development of the technology as well, not just the deployment. And when I started digging more into this, actually to go to what Daniel was talking about, the industry always engages in this race narrative. The thing that made it suddenly click for me, where I was like, wait a minute, I need to start calling these companies empires, is because of this race narrative. Empires always engage in a race narrative. Historically, the empires of old. The British Empire would always say that they were better than the French Empire. The French Empire said they were better than the Dutch Empire, and that they were in a race, an existential race, to either be the victor and bring progress and modernity to the rest of the world, or to lose to the evil empire and then have everyone go to hell. And that is when it suddenly clicked for me that this is, in order for people to really understand the full scope of what is happening, the degree of political and economic consolidation that these companies are engaged in, and that kind of race rhetoric and narrativization of what they're doing, we have to talk about empire.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And the other thing about empires, not just that they go fast, that they also need to get as big as possible, which sounds a lot like the thesis of my book about venture capital, which is this playbook that venture capital has created about how to develop these companies, which is they need to take as much market size as possible, as quickly as possible. And what all that allows for is big, right?
Yeah.
Big and fast. And what that forecloses, I guess, the thing that your metaphor and really the book opened up for me was to challenge an assumption I didn't even know that I was making, but you helpfully illuminated in the history of the development of the AI industry that the way that they approach building AI, these large language models, is through just throwing more compute at it. Get as big as possible. That's how you're going to get to these new technological breakthroughs. But that's just one hypothesis. And it happens to have worked, at least in the first rounds. It seems like they may be hitting a little bit of a wall now, but who knows? But that doesn't mean that's the only way to achieve it. And what this approach has done is sort of make everybody assume that getting as big as possible and operating in this extractive, colonial, empiric way is the only way to do it. But you had an example of in the book that I thought was like, oh, this is what this unlocks. These are the stories we can tell about a positive future for this technology when you have a different narrative frame. And I'm wondering if you can tell the story. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. First, before I tell the story, one of the things that's interesting in terms of the scaling empire and whether or not it has worked, I always push back a little bit of how are we defining what has worked? We've gotten more fluent chatbots, but ultimately, is that what we're looking for? Like, is that what we want out of AI? And so I end my book in the epilogue with a particular story of this group, Tahiku Media. They're a Maori radio organization in New Zealand, and they specifically they had this rich archive of audio throughout the years where they broadcast in Maori. So they had all of these 30-something years of audio of the Maori language. And Maori is, the Maori people, they, like many indigenous peoples around the world, have suffered sort of the same fate from the legacy of colonialism, which is that for generations, they were not allowed to speak their language due to racist assimilation policies, and they almost lost that language. And so there's a huge push now to try and revitalize the language, but one of the challenges is that there are very few fluent speakers. And so the Tahiku Media, they thought, we have this rich archive, we want to open it up as an educational resource for Te Reo Māori learners, but in order to do that, we want to transcribe the audio, we want to put it up on a website or in an interactive app where people can listen, look at the words, and then click on them and understand the meaning. So they needed to transcribe the audio, and they just do not have enough people, speakers with high enough fluency to do that. So they thought, let's build a speech recognition tool. So this is a form of AI, not like ChatGPT or not general purpose AI. It's a very task-specific AI tool. And they thought, in order to embark on this project, we want to do it fundamentally differently from the way Silicon Valley typically develops AI. The first thing that they did, they asked the community, do you want this AI tool? When the community said yes, then they said, okay, let's teach you about what it would take to build this tool. This is how much data we would need. This is the kind of data that we would need. And they created a community-wide effort to collect that data with full consent and with high quality, such that they were able to get away with just a few hundred hours of audio, transcribed audio, for training a relatively proficient speech recognition tool. And then they went back to the community and said, now that we have this tool, what do you want what kinds of educational resources do you want us to build for you with this tool? And what other types of AI technologies would you want to continue accelerating your learning in Te Reo Māori? And so through the entire process, it was an extremely consensual, democratic, participatory development process where they had a very clearly defined goal about how do we define it working? Like, what is success for this project? And the last and final part of this project was that they made sure once they had the data in their possession that they would be guardians over that data and not allow just anyone to access that data and potentially use it for applications that would harm the community. So they developed this license where it's a legally binding license for anyone who wants access to this data to abide by certain rules around how they use it, what they would use it for, whether or not they're allowed to use it for other projects after their initial proposal. And that was the commitment that they gave to the community. And that was part of the reason why the community was so excited to continue donating more data to this project. And it, like, from beginning to end, this program, this pilot project, it just flipped all of the different assumptions of AI development on its head.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think lets us start to imagine possible futures that where this technology is working for us and not on us. Dolores, I'm really interested to hear from you about your experience, first of all, on the OpenAI Commission. So for those in the audience who don't know, can you just say a little bit about what the OpenAI Commission was and why you were interested in participating in it?
Well, it was rather interesting that I was even invited to be on the commission because I'm kind of, when it comes to tech, I'm kind of in kindergarten or first grade, okay? I have to rely on my children or my staff, the president of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, to help me with anything that has to do with tech. And so I was rather surprised. And it was really interesting because many people were very upset with me because I accepted the commission. And they thought you shouldn't be there. You've got AI tech right now that is being used in Ukraine to kill people. It's been used in Gaza to kill people. Why do you want to associate yourself with any of these AI companies that do this, you know? And but I thought, well, you know what? I think I do want to serve on the commission. And I took that position because I thought that maybe I could be a voice for workers, for working people, because we know that these are the people that have been most affected by AI. And I know that when I go to a store or I go to a McDonald's and I see that you have to punch something to be able to order something, I just get very upset about that. Or where you're having to go through a checkout counter and they want you to self-check out. Well, what happened to the person that was here? And again, we know that these are workers that have families that depend on their wages to be able to support their families. And all of a sudden, their jobs are gone. What happens to these people, you know? And that really upsets me because I do believe that the working people are the foundation. I'll talk about the United States of America. The working people are the foundation of our country. And when working people work, the wages that they earn go into the community. They go into the income stream. You know, they buy things for their families and that they need. They buy appliances, you know, they buy automobiles or whatever. But the money goes back into the income stream. Whatever they earn goes back into the income stream. When people are very wealthy, well, they put their money into stocks and bonds, and sometimes it just stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. People just get more and more and more, and they get richer and richer and richer. And I don't think that that's very helpful for an economy. And the suffering that some of these families have to go through when they lose their job. And so when I accepted this role on the commission, I thought, well, maybe I can be a voice for workers on the commission. And the whole intent of the commission was to give recommendations to OpenAI, the tech company, what they could do, in other words, to help humanity with all of them, the money and the profits that they're going to be earning. Although OpenAI is a nonprofit organization, that is their mission statement.
Nonprofit.
Yeah, that's true. Nonprofit.
A $500 billion nonprofit.
And we know that these OpenAI and other tech companies are going to make jillions and jillions of dollars. And so what is that money going to be used for? And when I think of, we know, first of all, AI is with us. You know, we all use it, you know, whether we like it or not. It's part of our daily life and our daily work that we do. I know many people that are in education. I have a daughter who's a nurse, and she just loves the fact that she can make a report that she has to make, even on some of her medical work, that she can do it in just a few minutes, okay?
Yeah.
So it does remove a lot of toil, we might say. And in writing the report, I wanted to make sure that we did not think, well, that it also eliminates physical toil. Hey, well, there's nothing wrong with physical toil. It's very healthy. You know, people, people have to work. People have to work in something. If people don't have work or they don't have somewhere to put their energy, then we're going to go crazy. People are going to go insane. So we kind of thought, well, where can some of this, the profits that they make, where can it go? Well, it can go back into the community for projects like the one that you just described. It can go into the arts. We know education. We have so many needs in our society right now that the profits from all of these tech companies could fulfill, and specifically talking about open AI. But so I like to put it this way. AI can be a blessing or it can be a curse. It can be a blessing or it can be a curse. Of the fact that it makes so work easier in so many aspects of our society, and in that respect, it's a blessing. But at the same time, if it is not regulated or controlled, it can be a curse. And I think what we would like it is to be a blessing. And I think sometimes we can kind of compare AI with electricity. You know, Thomas Edison invented electricity, and at first it was very, very new. But now everybody takes it for granted, you know? And it became, I guess, the public utility, or I guess somewhat, because we know there are a lot of people that control our public utility system instead of having the people control it the way that it should be. And so we have to think of what is the future of AI. And on the commission, we had hearings. We had several hearings in Southern California, in the Valley, and also here up in the Bay Area.
So I'm actually interested to, because we've been, obviously, we did this polling that looked at how people are feeling about AI across the state. And I would say part of the commission, which was established by OpenAI as part of their sort of campaign, to smooth the path for their conversion to a for-profit company. And they were, I think, expecting that they were going to get a report that they could say, see, we've consulted with the community, and this is what they said. I was very grateful to see that in the report you actually said, in order for them to be living up to their mission, they have to be governed, the nonprofit has to remain an independent entity, which is really important. But you also embarked on this listening tour, which was essentially a round of focus groups, and this the research that we did and the work that you did are some of the only focus groups conversations that people have been having about specifically AI with everyday people around the state. So I was really curious to know what you heard in those focus groups, essentially, and do they align with what we found in our research?
Well, we heard from people in academia. And they love AI because they figure it's a great educational tool. At the same time, when we say that, we know that probably eliminates some people in the educational world. We heard from people in the entertainment industry. They actually submitted reports about what they would like to see AI do or not do, because so many, again, this is another place where so many jobs have been eliminated, We know that when the actors and the screenwriters went on strike, that a lot of that was talking about they're being replaced by AI, and then we also heard from workers. These are the people again that are being most affected, and what workers like to say, and the people that represented the working class, is that they would like to somehow have some of the tech companies work directly with workers. Giving an example, like maybe here in San Francisco, where they could talk directly to some of the people that work on the street, let's say cleaning streets, et cetera, and to say, well, to ask them, well, how do you think AI can make your job easier? You know, and then if they say, well, maybe cut out some of the administrative costs that you have, which could be very simplified, right? And then that would take away some work. But then how do you replace that work in terms of the income that they would receive? And so we had people talking about giving people a guaranteed income, like Michael Tubbs did in Stockton, California, and they're now doing it in Los Angeles, where they have I think about 500 families now, they have a guaranteed income. And this, of course, this helps the economy. So these are all of the questions that need to be answered before we fully embrace AI. And then again, when we talk about how AI is being used to wage war, I mean, you know, we have to think about that. And we know that's happening right now with companies like Pelletier and other people like that. Oh, and the other thing, too, when we think about the moment that we are in right now in the United States of America, and we can think, what is AI's role in our democracy? And I think this is a moment right now, and I would love to ask all these tech companies, what side are you on? Are you on the side of democracy? Are you on the side of authoritarianism? Are you on the side of fascism? I mean, these are serious, serious things. Yeah. And because we know, unfortunately, that we have a country here, the richest country in the world, where we have a lot of ignorance in terms of not only our civic responsibilities and our civic duties that we have, but even the way government works. You know, the way that government works, you know, I do a lot of public speaking. And when I do public speaking, I'll ask an audience, how many of you know who your state senator is? And a few people will raise their hands. I guess here in San Francisco might be better because you all know Scott Wiener, right? Who's a great senator.
But, very tall.
But it's interesting that people do not know that they don't know who the school board members are. We know that the school boards are the important work, yeah, right? Because the MAGA people are trying to ban books, you know. You have all of this campaign against our LGBTQ community that's going on against drag queens, et cetera. And I remember the first drag queen show that I saw was here in San Francisco when I was a teenager, okay? And I really say that I owe that drag queen show to make me understand that it's okay that there might be a third gender out there somewhere. So, I mean, there's education and civic knowledge, people being empathic, you know, to know people of a different ethnic group, et cetera. We just have so much civic ignorance, cultural ignorance in our society right now that's led us to this position that we are at today, where we have National Guard troops in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Where we see our mayors, our black mayors like Karen Bass, you know, being attacked, you know, by our own government. I mean, this is so scary. And so we've got to think, we have a lot of political education to do, civic education to do.
Which is important to make us resilient as AI comes into...
And what can the AI do to help?
Yeah.
And it's not just their responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility, right? But because they have become such a powerful force in our society. And I just want to add one little thing. So I'm from Bakersfield, California, you know, the San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley, where our food comes from, where the farm workers that are out there every day feeding people. There's young people during the pandemic, you know, the children of the farm workers, they didn't have broadband. You know, they didn't have computers. You know, so we have a whole generation of young people, and yet when they tried to pass a bill in Sacramento that was being carried by Mia Bonta, the Attorney General's wife, Mia Bonta had a bill in Sacramento that they had to put broadband in all of these places in California, especially our rural areas where we grow the food, and the tech companies got together and killed the bill.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not democracy and that is not justice. So we want the AI companies to stand up for democracy, to stand up for justice, to make the world a better place. We want them to use the jillions of dollars that they have to help humanity, not to oppress humanity.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So we are going to take questions from the audience. There are 2 microphones up here. If folks want to start lining up if you have a question. But just before we do that, I wanted to ask you all, I guess you can take your choice of closing question. I guess, Daniel, I know which one you'll choose. The first is, was there anything in the findings that surprised you? But I guess maybe there is still something in the findings that surprised you. The second one is, how do we, what's the positive vision here? It seems like each of you has touched on that in some way, that there is a real desire for people to harness this technology to create a future where this is really sort of, lifting humanity up. But many people don't feel like we're on that path. What's the story we can tell about the future that includes all of us, and how do we get there? So choose your fighter, which question you want to answer, and I'll just start with you, Daniel.
Oh God, sorry. Both are so attractive. I think, to be cheeky, I think there's an answer for both that come out of this. I think one thing that surprised me that I didn't hit on too much. It was sort of implied, but that really stayed with me, is just how stark the divide on gender is. Women are considerably more concerned about the future than men, more than any other variable. It's a big dimension. The other thing in terms of what is the positive vision, I think that
You said one or the other.
Oh,
Okay, Karen.
I'll take the positive vision.
Right.
I think the thing that I really want to see, this really builds on what Dolores was saying, is that I want there to be more civic engagement in how we shape technology's future, because I think a lot of people are assuming that AI is being dictated from the companies or from the government. There were some slides when Daniel was talking where people were like, is someone going to do something about it? And I hope my vision is that everyone recognizes that someone is them, and that they can actually actively shape this technology together, whether that means being on the commission and having this listening tour and synthesizing what people want, or it means, there's protests that are breaking out all around the US and around the world right now to push back against data centers that are not benefiting local communities, that are being built by these tech companies to support AI development. And there was a huge victory just a couple weeks ago where Tucson successfully blocked a data center project that had not been developed in any sense of the word with transparency. They did not tell the community who was developing that data center, what it was for. They didn't ask the community what they wanted out of the data center, any kinds of water or environmental restrictions on the data center. So I hope that everyone sees an active role in shaping this technology future, and they can define clearly for themselves and for the companies what exactly they want to see out of these tools and how, such that we know exactly what it means when AI starts to work.
Yeah, that's great. Dolores, anything that surprised you? Did you hear anything in Daniel's presentation that you thought was really different from what you all heard on the listening tour?
It kind of pretty much, what I saw pretty much kind of proved what I had been thinking anyway, or just seeing on the ground and listening to people. I thought it pretty much went. I think probably most people would probably agree with your findings, very definitely. But, again, talking about the environment, this is such a huge topic again. And so we think of AI as having all of this incredible knowledge, but then when we think about the fact that our planet is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and that we do have this vision of global warming and the end of the human species on this planet because of what's happening to our planet, and that's a responsibility that all of us have to take seriously. I often like to quote Senator Robert Kennedy, who just before he was killed in Los Angeles, he said, "We have obligations and responsibilities to our fellow citizens. we have obligations and responsibilities, and so this is something that I think all of us should take seriously, not only when we think about the civic world, elections, et cetera, but again, all of us have to do whatever we can to stop global warming, and yet we see it's just going in the opposite direction. And so I think many of the leaders in the tech world are kind of ignoring that. These are facts. This is science, and somehow they have to take responsibility. And I don't know how we can't say boycott AI, because that's not going to work, all right? Because all of us, this has become such a part of our lives and part of our work. But I think we have to think about what can we do to kind of get to these tech giants and say to them, hey, you have a responsibility to all of us. And the reason that they're making their jillions of dollars is because people are actually using AI and paying them to help us use it.
Do you use AI?
I think everybody uses AI. Every time we open our computers, you use AI. Every time you
don't have conversations with ChatGPT or Claude or anything?
I've been exposed to it, and I'm just amazed, okay? Amazed at how rich it is, and often how most of the time very, very accurate. We know it's a great tool. It really is.
Yeah.
And so nobody's going to start boycotting AI. So we've got to think of other ways to make these companies responsible to the planet and to humanity.
Great. So, thank you. Over to you all. There are microphones here. Please come up to the mic, and we'll start on this side and then go over here. So, yes.
Hello. Hi. This is for Daniel and Catherine. So, first of all, amazing presentation. We saw a lot of expected and unexpected data points there. Great stuff. I wonder if we roll back 50, 60 years ago and we ask Californians what do they think about nuclear energy and net adoption, you would have similar reaction from the people, right? There were protests in building nuclear power plants, like we have protests building data centers now. So from your perspective, if we look back at how humanity has coped with the energy of atom, right, and how we adopted it, what we think we should apply from that to how we adopt AI, and frankly, why does opinion of a regular Californian, why does it matter? Because it didn't matter then much. What's changed?
I think to not being an expert in the nuclear debate in California, I can't hit the nail on the head, but to offer something about a historical analogy that's kind of tied to energy, I think there is a lot of similarity around where climate change was at sort of 30 years ago, in that there's this big thing that's so hard for us to even work out, where does it begin or end, or what kind of impacts come from what kind of actions. It's so opaque. And it was only when we helped people start to understand the cause and effect of those, which actors are doing which things to cause which consequences, that ordinary people could start to see, oh, this person's being shit. We don't want that to continue. And so that's, I guess, to the reason we're here about why story is so important. Stories help people understand who is responsible and who can behave differently. And we did that with climate change, and people started to care and started to engage. And to your point about does that even matter? Yeah, at the point that climate concern became a deep and widely shared view in the community, legislators did start to respond and adapt to it. It took way too long. It was like dragging teeth, but ultimately, legislators respond to political incentives.
Yeah, I mean, I did just say something on the nuclear, and then want to get as many questions in as possible. But, I think it kind of depends on when you ask them. If you ask them after 3 Mile Island, I think you probably get a different answer. And I think it is a cautionary tale for AI. We may be living in a totally, to speak to climate change, a much greener future if the public had trusted nuclear energy. Oh. But there weren't guardrails around it, right? To the extent that it could have made it safe to prevent this disaster. So if industry is worried about, adoption and innovation, the worst thing they can do is decide that they don't want to have any guardrails, and then God forbid some, big disaster happens, they will never be able to develop these tools, again. So I also like to think about the airline industry. Like, can you imagine when commercial flight first started, what it must have took for like a normal person to get on a plane? Like that must have been a huge risk, and the structure of regulation that needed to be created around the industry in order for it to thrive and just to become something that we take for granted. I mean, maybe these days we are questioning things a little bit more than we should, but I think that actually helps us think about just how much we assume and can see that air travel is so safe. This thing that, when it was first invented was so risky. So that whole network of regulation and standardization that is run by government around this industry that has allowed this industry to create all the economic value that it has created is super important. And unless we have that, I think what Daniel has found in the research is that unless we have that structure that allows people to trust the technology, it can't thrive. It won't find a market. And whether people are right or wrong for not trusting it, if they don't trust it, they're not going to use it.
Thank you both.
Wait, we just want to get a few more questions, and I'm so sorry because we're going to be short on time. But then, yeah, I'm sorry.
I just want to make a comment on that.
On the nuclear.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that because actually it was the people of California that kind of got together, Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda, and others, to stop the spread of nuclear sites here in California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a question. So I think kind of what we've seen in California in terms of regulation around AI is this very piecemeal approach. So there's been, a few successes, like in terms of, one of the bills, like forces, the large LLMs to like kind of publish what's in their training data. Like there's been a few successes, but it's very piecemeal compared to the EU AI Act. And there's huge loopholes, like there's no regulation around guardrails. There's, stereotypes, hate speech, all these things are not defined where they're defined in the EU AI Act. So I guess how do we address this kind of piecemeal approach where there could be these wins where legislators can say, hey, we're protecting your privacy or we're doing X, Y, and Z, but we're not really addressing the holistic societal ills of AI. And I'm really fascinated about anti-discrimination in AI, specifically the spread of hate speech, stereotypes. There's clear bias. It, propagates historical bias. Like that's, in default because of the data, right? 80% of the data. So, sorry, I'm a data scientist.
Yeah, the question.
Yeah. So I guess that's my question, right?
How to avoid piecemeal type legislation?
Yeah. How do we go for this holistic approach like the EU?
Yeah. I think that's probably a question for you.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't know that the EU approach is necessarily better. I think there are ways to rationalize many different bills together to address certain parts of the problem. And actually, the California legislature has done a really good job on standardizing definitions across these many bills. So, the EU structure is much different than the way that legislation is made here, and I just don't think structurally it would work to do one big beautiful bill in California to
Let me give you
define.
Let me give you some examples. So, like for instance, on third-party bias audits, which is one of the proposed bills, there's no actual thresholds for how to conduct these bias audits or definitions around those bias audits, and they're not even public. So, I mean, frankly, I've not been super happy with.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There is a lot of work to do. I don't know if you asked folks in the EU, and this might be something that Daniel knows more about, but I don't know that they would tell you that that bill is perfect and everything is tight and tidy either.
I think and I'm so keen to get to everybody else, so I'll be extremely brief. But I would say that the EU AI Act is wonderfully ambitious, and I am very fond of their ambition, but even just seeing it go into the code of practice process and stuff over the last year, it's a grass is greener situation. Like you look at it and you think, oh, that's great, they're doing great, why aren't we doing that? It's a nightmare. I've stopped spending as much time in Brussels as I used to because it's so stuck. I think having seen it both there and here, the scale of ambition and the scale of stuff you're actually getting over the line here, albeit piecemeal, I acknowledge, is cumulatively far more impactful in my view.
Yeah, go ahead.
Also from the San Joaquin Valley. So, Karen, I'm particularly sensitive to your analogy that neocolonialism is happening through AI and it is impacting our land specifically. So I'm wondering, how can we use AI as an opportunity to help unstick the climate change conversation and help people understand, particularly in system-impacted communities, the impact that this technology is having on the land itself and not just on their jobs that may be related to the land?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think the fact that current AI development and its consumptiveness, it really has actually revitalized the climate conversation in some ways. Like when I started as a journalist, I actually wanted to be a climate reporter, not a tech reporter, but no one was interested in hiring climate reporters. This was like 10 years ago. It was because people had already heard the same story about climate change and about environmental issues again and again and again. So I actually feel like there's a new vitality around the conversation because people are starting to realize that the development of AI is really accelerating us in the opposite direction. So I guess the way is like seize the moment maybe, like continue, if you are a climate communicator or if you're just a concerned citizen, like keep educating people around you about the fact that this technology as it's being developed today is literally doing us no favors in the climate and environment department. And I think it has gained a lot more traction over the last even year.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah, hi. So Ms. Huerta earlier just said that AI can be a blessing or it can be a curse. We are so frequently told about, AI is going to be great for the economy and also it will do a bunch of damage. That sounds sad to me. Do you guys have any positive dreams for AI? What is the AI blessing in your wildest dreams? That the benefits it could bring us, if any, if you believe.
Yeah, I guess that's a better phrasing of the question I was trying to ask at the end there.
I think maybe I feel sad that everyone else was more optimistic and I wasn't. I think if there's a useful benefit or like a beneficial application or something like that, I think it's clear that the community is really hopeful that it may be developed in some way that will make it easier to get high quality healthcare in particular. That's one frontier where there's a lot of enthusiasm. And clearly the companies know that because it's something that they talk about in a lot of their communications. I think then there's also a hope that it will make a difference in some kind of way that affects people's everyday cost of living. There's a hope that it'll make milk or transport or these sorts of things cheaper for people. Exactly how that happens, I think, is extremely opaque, but that's what people are hoping might happen. I think for me, the question is really are we going to have enough courage to decide to build this in a way where it is either that it doesn't just get sucked into a pure profit motive and further exacerbate this kind of concentration of control and influence that people clearly see and are clearly very nervous about. I think if we're able to do that, I think there's a lot of things that could be really beneficial. But if we don't do that, it's just going to exacerbate the things people are hoping it'll solve.
To go back to the metaphor and analogy piece of this conversation, an analogy I often use is AI is like the word transportation, and that it's just so nebulous and there's so many different forms of AI just as there's so many different forms of transportation. And the hopeful vision that I see for AI is that we move away from these large-scale general-purpose systems that are ill-defined in terms of ultimately what goal they're trying to achieve and how they're supposed to serve us, towards more task-specific, small systems that are well-scoped and tackle problems that are surfacing in people's concerns about what they want, like having their commute be shorter. AI can actually do that. AI can coordinate traffic lights. They can optimize logistics processes so that there are fewer trucks on the road, that people are waiting at the traffic stops not as often. AI can improve people's healthcare, but not necessarily asking ChatGPT for health advice, but rather having, a trained radiologist with an AI tool that is designed to detect early stage cancer and be able to give patients a more advanced outlook on what their diagnosis is and their prognosis is so that they can make more informed decisions. That is the positive vision. I hope that we can, going back to what I said earlier, I hope we can have a more civically engaged conversation about what is what is exactly that we need? What do we want in life in general? Like, put technology aside. Like, what do we want to better society in general? Better education, better healthcare, shorter commutes, all of these things. And then what are the specific challenges that AI lends itself to tackling? Optimization problems, efficiency problems, and things like that.
I think that's actually a really great note to end on, because it really brings home this idea that the frame through which we see the problem opens up the possibilities for how we can build this technology into the future in a way that supports humanity, and isn't just in service to profit. So, we will continue to keep an eye on how people are thinking and feeling about AI, however we may judge them for thinking or feeling that way, and help to bring those voices into the rooms where decisions are being made about how this technology will be governed.